Hello everyone, my name is Wayne Leishman, a principal instructor with Software AG. My focus is on webmethods.io integration and the on-premise integration platform. In this video, I just want to cover how to do some error handling in your webmethods.io integration workflows. So there's been some questions. I know we have some information in the documentation. We have more training coming out later, but I wanted to put this quick video together just to summarize how you can use the different error handlers. And again, hopefully this is helpful to you. So upcoming, I'll just continue my video. You're going to see it in the monitoring status will show failure. But the problem is, if you need to control the error handling, right out of the box, there's a way to do it, but you have to add it in. So there's a couple things. If you go to the panel, if you type in error, you'll start to see two, error handler, global error handler. So my explanation is error handler is like a try-catch, right? So let's say you have a step, any step that you say, if this step has an exception, I want to transition and do something specifically, right? So that's what this is. So to use it, I would just drag it. Again, I could connect this to any. The point is, now this is kind of like there's the source step. This is like the try. And if an exception happens here, the workflow is going to transition here. Now after here, I can do anything I want, right? I could run another workflow. I could do anything. The point is, so let me just quickly show you. So maybe I always use loggers in my demo because it's quick and easy. Right, so like I said, if you want to do more of a shared error handler, you might want to look at something that's a workflow that just handles errors. So if you transition here, and if you do use, there is something called run. So you could run, it would run a specific workflow. If you use run workflow, just make sure you make it synchronous, right? Because if you send it asynchronous, it's not really good. You want it to be synchronous when you call the workflow, when you run it, and then you want it to come back. So again, in this case, if I configure, let's say, sorry, my font's kind of small. So again, let's just say I'm using the logger, okay? And remember, since I have the error here, sorry, I gotta move myself around. Sometimes the video is okay, but sometimes it's just a pain. So error handler, notice I get an error message and I get the stack. So again, I'm going to keep it simple. I could take out each one of these fields and do something with it, but so I'm just going to drag it and drop it there. Now I could do test. Now at this point, because the previous step hasn't thrown an exception yet during my testing, I don't see anything here, right? The input test. So it's not a big deal. I just say done. And now if this step fails, it's going to transition here. And then, yeah, you want to do something, right? So you could add any other logic you want. You may want to just code your error handler in here, But as I said, if you want to do more of a shared error handler, you create another workflow with a webhook, make sure it's synchronous, and then you could run that workflow, and then it would do whatever you want in the workflow and return back. But let's keep it simple. Okay, so the thing is, let me just save this and I'll run it. So this step shouldn't, I don't think it has an action. Let me just, or has an error. Let me just double check. I'll explain how I throw the error in a minute. No, okay. So yeah, no, there's no error here. It just logs data, and it's going to send an email, and it should come through this path. So it'll send me an email. And at a minimum, you may want to do that. You may want to, if you trap the error, maybe you send an email when the error occurs. Okay. So let's run it. Nothing fancy. Yeah, so see it, everything was good, no exceptions here. And remember, this could be any of the actions that you have here. When the workflow, when it's running on the server and it detects an exception in any action, that's what this error handler will be thrown. So let's show you how I test this or demo it to show how the error works. So I go into my settings, and I wasn't sure how do I want to demo an exception. Oops, sorry. So what I realized is, let's go next. So I realized if I use a specific transformer, and again, if you haven't done transformers, it's in the documentation. It's just ways of transforming or mapping data from source to target and changing it. What I did was, if I edit this transformer, I use a substring built-in transformer, and I basically took an email ID I have in the project properties. It's not really that important. But the thing is, you'll notice I took the index of 0 to 4, which meant it would just take a substring of this field here, which was my email. But the way I forced an exception, I just changed something to non-numeric. Let's change them both. So if I say done, this is closing the transformer, and now the transformer is being used here. The point is that transformer, when it executes, is going to throw the exception. So let's say next. So let's test this action now. Yeah, you notice at the top the error, this is the exception that was thrown. So it's failed. So I did this because I want to show you now. Let's save this. So now this action is going to fail. So when I run it, see, it took this other path, right? So this was caught, the exception was caught. It went, I basically sent myself an email, or sorry, I just logged the error, right? That's all I did. And then it will transition to some sort of error handler. Like I said, I'm just logging it, but maybe you have a shared error handler workflow. Or even, you could even use a flow service. Remember, there's the flow services available, but that gives you more advanced capability that you can do more programming. But that's another topic about flow services that there's going to be separate training on that. But the point here is once you handle this exception, you kind of catch it, then the transition happens. So I just ran it and it went to the end, and basically my status, well, let me move myself again. It's hard to get in the right spot. Okay, so what I want to show you is if I come to just the debug panel. Now I've run this a bunch of times before, but I want you to see if you go to execution history, which is right here, these are all the times I was running it. Now you'll notice it's success, success, success. So let's just show that again. So let's save it, run it. So again, error, caught it, did something basic here. And then if I go to here, now notice when I come here, it's the specific workflow execution history. It is telling me the steps, the actions that were executed, but it's telling me, oh, there was an error here, right? We caught the error. This is the path that was executed. But then if I go to my execution history, you'll see success. So that's something to consider. I'll mention in a few minutes about if you want behavior of doing something called resume, like if you want to resume your workflow at a failed action. So I'll get to that in a minute, but let me just close that. So yeah, if you did this and put these transitions, you want to make sure if you do trap the error, that you somehow log the error or notify somebody or whatever you need to do, right? I don't think right now we have a sort of a throw exception. I think if you want to use something more advanced or complex, remember you could use the flow services, right? And I'm not covering flow. I don't have flow anyways, do I? Yeah, flow here. Now, flow is advanced. This is not meant for citizen integrators. This is meant for integration specialists. So anyway, yeah, if you wanted to do something more advanced for us error utility, you could come here, but you have to know what you're doing as far as flow service development. You have to be like a programmer. So if you're a citizen integrator, pretty more non-technical, if you're thinking of error handling in a workflow, you can do stuff like this. You could trap it, do maybe just send an email or something. But if you want to do more, you probably want to at least run a workflow, some sort of shared capability, or maybe at a minimum, again, you just send an email. But so that's the behavior here. So the way it works also, as I said, this traps this on here. Now I want to show you the global error handler. So let me just pretend I don't have, so you could keep this in. You could put error handlers on any action, any step. But to demonstrate what happens, let's say I don't have the step level error handler, and I'll get rid of this. So again, this is bad. Normally, as I said, you may want to do fine-grained error handling. You would put it on whatever actions you want to specifically catch. But let me go back to, so there's the global error handler. So again, that's kind of like the catch-all error handler. If you have an exception somewhere in your workflow and you haven't caught it with an error action, it's going to look for a global error handler, and you would only have one per workflow. So if I do this, you get kind of a little panel here. And then I'm just keeping it simple. You can put whatever you want to have in here, right? It gives you kind of a start of the global error handler, an end. So this would get invoked or executed. So what you put between here can be as basic or complex as you want. Maybe again, it's just an email, or maybe you're doing something more complex. Maybe you're running a common error handler workflow. But again, I like to demo the easiest way I find. As long as you get the concepts, you just put whatever you want in here. And again, you always have to make sure you configure, right? So I'm just going to keep it at logger, but now notice I have another input available. So it knows it's the global error handler data. So there's the message, stack information, failed action ID. So this is all good information, but so you would use it. I'm just going to drag it, drop it there. Oh, I'm in the way again, sorry. I debated whether I would put my video here, but so yeah, then you'd go next. Now in this case, again, it's warning me saying, hey, it's not aware of any test data for a global error handler because we haven't executed that type of problem before. So I'm just going to say, you could try test. But again, that doesn't really do anything. I just say done. And I'll just show you what happens here. So again, save it. Whoops. Save it. Now remember, because I have no step level error handling, it should error out on here and go right to here. Now it may be a practice if you need to, as I said, you may use a combination of both, right? You may want to have a step level error handler. And if you don't want to put it on every step, anything that falls through the cracks, you might want to globally catch it. So let's run this. If all goes well, that should execute. Yeah, did you see that? So it failed here, came here, went here, whatever. But as I said before, it does show the path, the execution path in the workflow went to the global error handler. But if you look at the execution history, again, it's a success. Considered a success. I think if you need to get any fancier than that, maybe set different statuses or something, you probably have to look at doing like a flow service, but at least this gives you the idea of how it works. Okay. There's a feature called resume. So resume is meant to, if you have an exception on an action, on a step, it's meant to give you, if there's a failure status, it would give you the ability to resume on that failed step once you fix the problem. I'll just prove it to you by getting rid of this. So again, we now have no error handling and nothing would be caught. It basically would go right up, I guess you could say, the call stack. Now I know this is technical talk, but it basically goes up to let the application and the server catch the exception. But what I want to show you now is, let's run this again. Again, it stops there. Let's go to execution history. And notice now the status is failed. And so you definitely, I'm in an execution history, so I can debug and see what happened. So I can drill into this. I can see here, I can look at logs or what the actual error was. So the idea behind this, let's say you determine what the problem is with this. Let's say it is this step, right? We know it's this step. So you go in, you say, okay, I'm going to fix the problem. So let me simulate that. So again, remember I was forcing an exception. I'm just going to edit this. Now there's no such thing as a cause failure transformer. I just created that transformer and just to demonstrate, right? So let's call that. I'll move myself again in the middle here. So yeah, I gotta say done. So that transformer should be considered valid. So you could think of this as I've just fixed the issue. Now it could be a connector that had the issue, intermittent issue. The point is you want to make, if you're going to do a resume on a step, you want to make sure you're resuming and it's going to be successful. So let's just say next. I can do a test here, but it shouldn't give me, oh, it is giving me a failure. What did I do? Let me go back and double check. Oh yeah, sorry. I meant to fix the problem. And I just broke it again. So let's go here. I'll use 0 to 5, whatever. Doesn't matter. Done. Next. Test. This should work now. And it should show me. Yeah, it shows me the success. And there's my part of my email ID. So I say done. So now, like I said, this is considered a fixed issue. And in this case, I happen to have to fix the code. It may be your action has a failure when it's doing something to whatever you're connecting to. But in this case, okay, I fixed it. I can come back to execution history. Now I told you I wasn't going to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway just to show you. So then I could say, oh, okay, this was the failure. And again, it failed here. I could say resume. Now I got to read it on my other monitor because it's kind of small on here. So yeah, it's saying workflow execution will resume right from the point it failed. You can click edit the input if you want to change the input data at that failed action. So you could come here and if you had to tweak the input, or you just say resume without editing the input. So let's edit. Now again, this text is just saying what's going to happen. It's going to resume from the point of failure. It's telling you can edit the input, and then you can just resume the execution directly if you're okay with the input. So let me just check edit input. Now, see, this is the issue. So it's telling me here's what the input it captured. Remember, it was my transformer that had an issue, right? So it's remembered that data. So even though I fixed it, it's saying, do you want to use that existing data? Or when you resume, do you want to fix it? So if I want this to work, even though I fixed that issue, I would have to come in here to make it work. I'd have to say, let's say 0. And again, let's say 5. So it gives you a chance to make the data correct. And then I would say resume. So see just what happened. So it did resume, and it took that saved data that was failure data, and then it basically re-executed from that point, and I didn't get an exception this time. So if I go to that execution, you'll see now it finally went through to the end. It sent me the email. This is also available. Let me quickly show you this. So let me just put that error back. So again, I like to do a test because it's a good practice. So let's save it. And again, now if I run it, it should error out on this step again. Let's run it. So there it is again. The point here is if I go to my history, okay, there's a failure. I can resume here if I want. I could do it here or export any data if I want to see it and export. But what I want to show you is the other place I can do it is go out of here, go to monitor, go to workflow execution, and then you'll see the tracking of my executions. So here's the logs, and it's right here, the failure. There's all the previous ones, and then I can drill into it here. And again, I have the ability to come in here. Let's just try to resume here. Yeah, this is what they've implemented. They actually just changed this recently. So they put this same panel. Again, I could just resume it if I don't want to change that data that was saved. Or I can edit the input, and here's my data. Transformer result. Okay. I can get from the drop down. There's my substring transformer. So I would have to come here. Let's say I do 0 again. Whoops. Gotta get that. Yeah, so this would be, okay, I'm fixing the error. Now remember that you may not need to edit the input because it might not have been the data that was causing the exception. So you would just keep it the same, right? But in this case, if you want to allow this behavior, then you can do it. So then if I do resume from here, again, see running. Now I did notice a side effect here. I've told R&D about it, told the product manager, they're addressing this, but notice it says running, stop execution. It should be done already, but watch, if I just do refresh, it's just a minor issue. So there it shows success there, okay? Okay, now I want to give you a sample or example of this feature called restart. So the other feature was resume. It lets you, if you had errors at certain steps or actions here, remember if the exception occurred, you could then go back in for the failure and say resume, and it could pick up a certain action. Now, the new feature I want to talk about is called restart, and restart will let you start at the beginning of the workflow. And a couple requirements. You need a webhook trigger. So again, this is standard webhook trigger. I'm not going to go into it because we have other training on webhooks, but basically this is standard. You can make it synchronous or asynchronous. Remember with the feature. So you see this one's a synchronous webhook to return a response to the client. And in this case, let me move myself over, sorry. using all these tools, and it's kind of nice. But so what I do is using Postman. So we have a tool. There's a tool out there you might want to look at. It's called Postman. It's just handy for testing. Anyway, so basically this, here I am trying myself again. Okay, there I am. So yeah, this URL you take from the webhook and you put it in your HTTP post, and you set up all your whatever headers you need, and you set up your body, so your payload and your headers, and so things like content type, and if you need a token, pass a token. But what I want to show you is, now remember, this is not part of the workflow. It's an external application, test application that I dragged in here. I just want to show you, right now this doesn't have any errors in it. I don't have my exception set. So it should basically flow right through. And I'm going to go to do my send. Yeah, so that all that did is very similar to before. It goes and logs some data, but then it has sends an email, and then in this case, because I made it synchronous, it sends a response back. So in my Postman client, there would be a response in here. Okay. So let's get this out of the way. Now, the thing about this, if I go to my execution history and I come here, you'll see I've had it. This latest one was also successful. And just like before, in this case, let's say I have an exception. Again, I'm going to put it on this step because I'm just putting a transformer here, right? So let's just, or I mean, I could put it on any step. The point is I'm just doing a transformer. So let's go back in here. This will save me from just adding a new transformer. I'll come in and edit this. And in this case, let's, again, just some non-numeric value. And I'm going to next, test. I'm just looking at my other monitor if you wonder what I'm doing. And you notice it threw an exception. And then I'm done. Okay, make sure after making the change, saving it, right? So if I didn't save it, we don't get the changes. So now let's bring back in Postman. And we'll do a set. Yeah, so you can see it right here. The same issue occurs where, let me take Postman out of here. So it failed on this action if I go to execution history. So I gotta move myself again, sorry. So just like before, I have a resume, but I also now have something called restart. So restart is, like I said, is meant to just restart from the beginning. Resume would actually allow me to restart, in this case, at this action, this step, or any other action if there was a failure. So it's the same concept. I won't cover the resume because we've already covered it. But the point about restart, I would just click restart. And again, I have that option to edit the payload or just do a restart directly. Maybe I just want to rerun the whole workflow. So it's up to you. If I edit the payload, it's the same idea, right? I can come in and edit the payload. or again, just directly. So in this case, if I just, in my case, because the error occurred on the action, if I just restart, it's still an error, right? This is always going to be an error because in this case, my error condition still exists. So rather than restart, you may want to fix the issue on this, whatever step that failed, and do a resume instead of a restart. But maybe your workflow failed because of a intermittent issue that you know has been solved, but it makes more sense to rerun the entire workflow. You just have to be aware of if any updates were made along the way, right? So if you had actions making updates and then you do a restart, keep in mind it may try to do some things twice, so you might have to just have certain logic to allow for that. All right, so again, that's the basics of that. The other thing is just to show you, I'll just save this for now. So just like resume, if you go to the monitor and you go to flow executions, and then here you see, remember all the status. Let's go to this one. And you see now, because again, you have a webhook and you have a failure, it adds in the restart button. So either place you can resume and either edit the payload before resuming, or you could, in this case, let's do this. So I can restart and I can still edit the payload if I want to, or just do a plain restart. Now in my case for this workflow I have, if I do a restart, it's going to fail again. Just that same behavior I mentioned earlier. So this is just another failure. The problem is, again, since I have an error in that action, as we saw before, it's going to stay there because it's a bug in the code. Now you may have, more realistically, you may have a data error. So you may find that, oh, you just have to make a fix to the data, right? So yeah, keep these two features in mind because you may want to use them. The other thing I wanted to show you was so this is the project I'm using, the restart demo. But I want you to see if I have a workflow now that implements the error handling. So just like before, I won't be able to use restart in this case because I've implemented error handling. So just while I'm doing this, I want to just double check something. So I want to make sure my URL for my test matches what I'm using in my Postman client. Okay, so I'm over in, you can't see it, but I'm over in Postman. So I gotta paste in the new URL. And the other thing I should double check is my auth token. So yeah, like I'll just quickly show you. So there's my URL. Here's my header information. I just have to just double check this. So I'll just paste in. Yeah, it's the same auth token. Okay, so let's get rid of, move Postman aside for now. So in this case, I'll just finish it. Now, what I want to show you is you already know what the happy path is like, right? So let's just go. I just can't remember if this one, if I have the error turned on or the exception. So in this case, it would work, but I want to force the error because I want to show you with the error handling implemented what would happen. Okay, so I'll kind of put Postman in at the bottom, but I want you to see what happens. So, make sure to save. So save Postman back here. And let's just do ascend. Sorry, I gotta come back. I just want to move some of the stuff around. Okay, so let's do ascend. Okay, you see right away, it still failed on that, happened to be that action. But in this case, sorry, I'm gonna hide, I'll hide Postman. In this case, it's the global error handler. So once it comes here, it's going to execute any actions you have here. And then it's going to end. So the point I wanted to show you is an exception occurred, but I handled it. So if I come to my workflow execution history, it does show you the error handler, global error handler was executed. But if I come to execution history, you see it shows up as success, right? So in this case, because I've handled the error, I can't do a restart or resume, right? And I mentioned that earlier when I covered resume. So, okay, there's one other feature I wanted to show you while we were doing this video. Remember I mentioned that typically if you put any error handling in your workflow, like this, here's the action level error handler, here's the global error handler, that if this runs, remember, so I'm going to submit from Postman, just hang on a sec. So as you saw, I put an action level error handler in here, but so in this case, if you look at execution logs, go to history, you see it says it was a success. And this is the way it's been since the original release of the product. But what they just came out with, and again, this recording is done mid-September 2020. In the most recent release, they came out with a feature to allow you to override and set the status to be failure. So if you come over to the right and just type fail in there, you'll see it's called set workflow status fail. So the way you do it, so let's just, it's pretty obvious, I guess. If you want to fail the workflow, you would, let's say let's put it here. Now, again, you have to do some reconnecting. So let's say you caught the error. You may have some error handling, like this just logs it, but you may have a other workflow, or, you know, you may do more than just log. But what I want you to do is, in this case, I just like disconnecting, so I'm gonna reconnect it to here. So now, again, on this pathway, it would come here and set the status to failure. So let's just save that. And then again, I'm off in Postman. You don't see this, but so yeah, here it is now. So let me just do a send. Yeah, it's better if I get out of the way, sorry. So I'll just put it on my other monitor. I'll do send. So you saw it go through, right? It went right through this path here. Now the difference, because I've added this in here, which is kind of a neat idea, if I come here, you see the status has failed. So the cool thing about that is now, as I told you earlier, the thing about using error handling, you can't do resume or restart. Well, now I'm telling you you can, just because now they have this new action that you can use. So if you want to use error handling, plus you want to have the resume restart capabilities, you just have to add in, so something like this. Or if you don't want to do this, remember, as soon as you handle the error, it's caught. So in this case, let's just get rid of this. So let's just say you want to put it in here. It's the same thing if you put it in your global error handler. Let's just reattach this. There's benefits to reattaching instead of just drawing the line again, because it maintains what you have defined already on transition. Anyway, so yeah, now we have no step level error handler. So in this case, because I had the failure on this action and I had my action error handler, it just so happens it went there and it finished. But if I had my error handler on here, and let's say this step executed successfully, then it went here, it went, and then let's say an error happened on this step for some reason, then it would go to your global error handler, right? So as I said before, you can mix step level error handling with global error handler, but this is the same thing, right? Now I can come in here, I'm doing whatever global error handling I want to do. My basic logger, all this does, if I come in here, again, it's just another action. You can tie a message to this, so let's just say, now I'm keeping it basic. Obviously you could get fancier with putting in names and dynamic values from the incoming data, etc. Right? But yeah, in this case, it would set the status and it would put that, add that error message. So let's say next, and remember test. Yeah, just saying here's the error occurred in workflow status test. So then say done. Remember to save. Okay, so remember my error is still occurring here, but now it should jump to the global error handler. So let me open Postman in my other monitor and do a send. Yeah, so it opened automatically the execution history, but let's just show you. So yeah, there's the latest one here, failure. And again, you can restart, resume, whatever. But if you click on it, you can see again the path it took, global error handler. Because I ran logger in that global error handler, it's just showing me all I was doing was logging the error message. So if you don't have logger, you're not going to see this. And then errors. So this is the actual error that was trapped. And yeah, so basically that's the error that occurred. But yeah, the key thing is now I have this failure, and I can do, like I showed you before, resume, restart, or just like before, you can come into monitoring, workflow execution, and so there's the latest one, the latest failure. And again, if I open it, I have resume, restart. So whichever way you want to do it. Okay, so keep this feature in mind, because as I said at the beginning, early on, I said if you do error handling, you can't, it's always going to succeed, but now this new feature came out that lets you override and set the status to failure. So again, that's essentially it. I wanted to give a little video. I saw the question about error handler, global error handler posted, and I want to again just put this little demo together. So again, if you have any questions, keep using that forum about webmethods.io integration, and I try to monitor it, as does many other people who are responsible for the product.